Thank you for having me, Abby. I got a tour of the facility. It's other than getting downtown, it's really nice to be here. And I like the vibe, and certainly enjoy working with the group that we work with. This is my daughter Lauren, and then we have two of our medical students are here, and my office manager Roxanne is here. So, how many of you would like to live longer and feel better? Okay, you're in the right place. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. It's just some simple things that you can do to live longer and feel better. So first I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I had an interest in irritable bowel syndrome. I know that sounds very glamorous, but that actually stemmed from an interest in food intolerances and food sensitivities, and this goes back to 1989 when I published the first book on irritable bowel syndrome. At the time there wasn't a book on that particular topic. So I've been in practice 34 years, and a lot of my focus has been on gut health. I'm an internist by training. I'm not a gastroenterologist, but a lot of what we do is seal and peel the gut. Actually, what happened was I heard there was a lot of money in natural gas. I just got into the wrong type. So these are 3 editions of a book that the last one came out in 2001. Don't run out and get the book. It's a little bit dated, but if you want more information, go to our website. I do a lot of blogging. There are a lot of more contemporary blog posts that you'll get more information than getting any one of these books. But I just wanted to give you a little background because one of the things we're going to focus on is gut health, and that's critical. I mean, if you want to take your health meter wherever it is and move it as far to the right as you can, it all starts with making sure that your gut is functioning optimally. So let's take a minute to talk about what is functional medicine. And I like to contrast it with traditional medicine. And traditional medicine is kind of the disease-drug model. Here's the disease, here's the drug. And I'm sad to say that Big Pharma kind of runs the show when it comes to traditional medicine. So for functional medicine, what we do is we try and look for the root cause of the problem, look at how all the organ systems interrelate with each other, and use natural treatments whenever possible. Now, does that not make sense? Why wouldn't you look for the root cause of the problem? Why wouldn't you look at how all the organ systems interrelate? And I think one of the problems with more traditional or Western medicine is it's very siloed. You've got the cardiologist looking at the heart, and the neurologist is looking at the brain, and the GI guy's looking at the gut. And at the end of the day, the purpose of the body is to carry around your brain. So you really want to have a healthy brain. So we not only look at your gut, but we really focus on brain health as well. And another way to look at it is functional medicine is the medicine of why, not the medicine of what. Traditional medicine is very good at telling you what you have. Well, you have migraine headaches. You cross-check that with a list of drugs to treat migraines, and you're on your way with your prescription. So with functional medicine, we just keep peeling back the layers of the onion and always ask the question, why? So I like to illustrate that with a real patient case study. So this 35-year-old female comes into the office, and her main complaint is palpitations. So rule number 1 for me is every patient complaint is a drug side effect until proven otherwise. So this is a take-home for you. If you've got anything new, whether it's headache, diarrhea, rash, look at your medications. Is there anything new that you're taking? So you can figure that out. And so she had palpitations, and she had been placed on a drug called Mirapex by a neurologist to treat restless leg syndrome. That's when the palpitations started, and Mirapex, which is a dopaminergic drug, probably doesn't mean much to you, but it enhances the effects of dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter. And her palpitations started when she started Mirapex, given her by the neurologist, to treat her restless leg syndrome. So my question is, why does she have restless leg syndrome? Well, restless leg syndrome is most often associated with the low iron level. And as it turns out, iron is a cofactor for converting tyrosine, which is an amino acid, into the neurotransmitter dopamine. So instead of looking at her iron, she got put on a drug to kind of enhance her dopamine levels. So we don't stop there. The next question is, why does she have a low iron? And as it turns out, she was put on an acid-blocking medication, Prilosec, to treat her heartburn. And we have acid in our stomach for a reason. If you're taking acid-blocking medications on a regular basis, you need to reconsider that, because when you block the acid, you block the absorption of a lot of vitamins and minerals, including iron. So she had a low dopamine because she had a low iron. Are we going to stop there? No. She had a low iron because she's on an acid-blocking medication. She's on an acid blocking medication because she has heartburn. Are we going to stop there? No. Good. So she had was on Prilosec because she had reflux esophagitis or heartburn. Why did she have heartburn? Well, as it turns out, 60% of people that have heartburn are actually reacting to gluten. In other words, if you get them off gluten, take everybody with heartburn, about 60% it goes away. Now, it's a little tough if you've been on acid blocking medications for a long time because you get a rebound acid secretion. So at the end of the day, we got her off gluten, got her off the Prilosec, iron levels came up, dopamine levels came up, and restless leg syndrome is just one manifestation of low dopamine. Low dopamine is the feel-good neurotransmitter, and low dopamine can cause problems with anxiety, depression, ADHD, apathy. So all these other things improve as well. So that's just one illustration of kind of what we do in our practice as we try and help patients and figure them out. So when you look at this, you go, gosh, that's everything, right? Well, yeah, everything can be related to poor gut health. I had a patient with anxiety and ADHD that came to us, no digestive complaints, and we did some work with his gut, and he comes in later, and he said, I'm so much better. I've got much more mental clarity, less brain fog. And as it turned out, the striking thing about this particular patient is that he was a technical writer, self-employed, did contract work, and he was able to show that he had increased his productivity by 25% by fixing his gut, decreasing his brain fog and his anxiety. So for this particular individual, it was like he got a 25% raise. How many of you would like to? No, aren't kidding.
Yeah, you're right.
You know, 12% of the population has a thyroid problem now. And the most common is Hashimoto's thyroiditis or autoimmune thyroiditis. And if you have one autoimmune disorder, you're 3 times more likely to get a second one. And we'll talk more about that. So the functional medicine approach, and we give this talk to a lot of employer groups, really is a benefit to all of you because you might get one thing out of here that you're able to change that can have a significant impact in terms of how you feel. And not only how you feel, your spouse, your significant other, your kids. So it's very impactful. And this is one of the ways that we can decrease healthcare costs. I mean, we're all in the business. We're on the provider side, but you guys have to manage the physician group. God bless you all. Herding cats is not easy, but I think you're doing a great job. So let's talk a little bit about the autoimmune epidemic. Clark, who's one of the medical students, is a 4th-year student at Rocky Vista. He joined me 3 weeks ago, and we're working on a webinar that we'll be doing for the physicians that are part of PHP to convince them that the autoimmune epidemic is real and it relates back to poor gut health. And if nothing else, hopefully at the end of this, you'll realize that, yes, it's all about fixing the gut. Is that going to fix everything? No, but it's where you've got to start, and it's going to make people feel better, and it's going to help them with a lot of different things. So there's been a 400% increase in autoimmune disorders in the past 25 years. Now, can you imagine if we had a 400% increase in cancer or heart disease? Everybody be running around looking for the cure, right? And if you look at what we spend about $50 billion a year on cancer treatment. We spend $100 billion a year on autoimmune disorders. We spend $6.1 billion on cancer research. We spend $49 million on autoimmune research. So why this is not, more on the radar? Well, it should be. I mean, just look at these graphs. I mean, how many of you know somebody with MS? And as it turns out, just as an aside, MS may relate to vitamin D deficiency and might account for the fact that you don't see it in more southern latitudes where the vitamin D levels are higher because people are exposed to more sun. And as you know, vitamin D is the sunshine vitamin. And even though we get a lot of sun in Denver, we're too far away from the equator to really get adequate vitamin D levels. And if you haven't had your vitamin D level, I would venture almost every one of you who's not taking extra vitamin D is low. We did a study with the Aurora Fire Department in around 2009, and we screened 24 firefighters. I was the fire department physician at the time. 24 of 24 were low. We gave them vitamin D. They filled out a questionnaire at the beginning and the end of the study. We checked their blood levels. They all felt better based on this symptom questionnaire just from taking vitamin D. As I alluded to earlier, if you have one autoimmune disorder, you're 3 times more likely to get a second one. So if you came to us, our job would be, if you had Hashimoto's, would be to try and make sure as best we could you didn't get that second autoimmune disorder. So why are we having this autoimmune epidemic? And we're going to talk more about leaky gut, but this is an interesting chart that shows the use of glyphosate and the incidence of celiac disease. Now, celiac disease I like to use as the prototype of an autoimmune disorder because it's on the rise. A lot of people think that whole gluten thing's a fad, and I would love to debate anyone that thinks it's a fad on national TV, and they won't win the argument. But celiac disease has gone from about 1 in 3,000 in the 70s to 1 in 100. How many of you know somebody with celiac? Yeah. How many of you pay attention to how much gluten you ingest? And it's not just celiac, there's this whole non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which is another area or another way that you can react to celiac. This is from the journal Toxicology, and they've got the same graphs looking at glyphosate and thyroid cancer, mortality from gastrointestinal infections, MS. So we're going to find that glyphosate, and I'm not here just to talk about glyphosate, but we're going to find that glyphosate is really the tobacco of the decade and is probably what's driving this autoimmune epidemic because glyphosate damages the lining of the small intestine. And if you damage the lining of the small intestine, you can call that leaky gut, which is a slang term for increased intestinal permeability. So it would be like saying you have tennis elbow and nobody buys it. That would be like saying leaky gut. Or we say you have lateral epicondylitis and all of a sudden it becomes legit. So increased intestinal permeability, if you Google that in autoimmune disorders, you'll find over 8,000 papers in the established literature. So people that think leaky gut's a quack diagnosis and not real, just change the name to increased intestinal permeability. Go Google that. So what really happens with leaky gut? Think of the lining of the small intestine as like a cheesecloth. Does everybody know what a cheesecloth is? So if you stretched it out, it would be the surface area of a tennis court. And if you took some food and you put it in a blender and you pulsed it a few times, that would be like chewing. Poured it in the cheesecloth, you're going to get the liquid on this side and the solid stuff on this side. If you go damage the cheesecloth and pour your mixture in, what's going to happen? You're going to get chunks of the partially digested food into the bloodstream that shouldn't be there. So in the case of gluten, again, I like to use that as the best case study for examples. Under normal circumstances, if you take the gluten protein, which is found in wheat, rye, and barley, it's made up of these constituent amino acids, and your body should break that protein into the constituent amino acids, and that's what should come across your cheesecloth. But if the cheesecloth is damaged, you get chunks of the gluten protein, sequences of amino acids that come across the cheesecloth into the bloodstream. In the lining of the small intestine, you have 80% of your immune cells. So the small intestine is the largest immune organ in the body. So let's pretend this is the cheesecloth, and it's got holes in it, and you're getting chunks of the protein. The immune system gets activated, it starts making antibodies. And in the case of Hashimoto's thyroiditis, there's a cross-reaction between the antibodies being directed against the gluten protein and the native thyroid tissue because the sequence of amino acids here looks the same as here. So that's why we're seeing the epidemic. When one thing damages your cheesecloth, then you start reacting to all these other foods you wouldn't react to if you had an intact cheesecloth. All the stuff gets into the bloodstream. You get all the systemic inflammation that kind of looks like rheumatoid. The rheumatologists don't know what to do with a lot of these patients. They're not the classic lupus and rheumatoid patients we would have seen when I was in medical school in the 80s. They just ache all over and something's not right. Well, it's not right because they've got a damaged cheesecloth. So if you ask me, what do? We fix your cheesecloth. So how do we fix the cheesecloth? I like to refer to it as the 4Rs approach. I didn't come up with this. This is kind of a standard functional medicine way of looking at it. So the first thing is to remove anything that's making you sick. And so when you look at things that can damage your cheesecloth in 3 broad categories, there are foods. We mentioned GMOs. So to the extent you can eat organic, non-GMO, that's the way you want to go. And then there are other foods. Gluten's kind of a chicken and an egg. It can damage the cheesecloth in susceptible people, or if you have a damaged cheesecloth, you're more likely to react to gluten. So if you take the celiac patient, so celiac's the worst form of gluten reaction, affects now 1 in 100 people as opposed to 1 in 3,000. But if you take celiac patients and you get them off of gluten 100%, you will get 8% of those patients that have a normal cheesecloth if you do a biopsy 18 months later. And this study's actually been done, which is to say that 92% still have damaged cheesecloth. And the cheesecloth sits on these little finger-like projections called villi, which act as sort of the root for your root system for your plant body to get the nutrients out of the small intestine. So if you take that same celiac patient, you still need to repair their cheesecloth. And the reason going off gluten isn't enough by itself is because something else damaged the cheesecloth to begin with. And if you get back to the celiac analogy, it takes 3 things to get celiac disease. You have to have the gene, and that's why it's a good prototype, because we know what the genes are for celiac, DQ8 and DQ2. So you have to have the gene, you have to have the exposure to gluten, and the third thing that has to happen is you have to have increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut from some other cause that allows portions of the gluten protein to come across the cheesecloth, and then the gene gets turned on. So what's happening today versus 25, 30 years ago is the celiac gene is getting turned on in more people than it was back then, and it's getting turned on in more people because of our diet, probably glyphosate. So the second thing you've got to do is to have a strategy to try and repair the cheesecloth that goes beyond removing what's damaging it to begin with. And when you look at the other things that damage the cheesecloth, it's pathogenic microorganisms like yeast, parasites, and pathogenic bacteria. That needs to be eradicated. And then the third thing is medication. So a lot of these patients that have achiness and systemic inflammation, bless you. I'm not authorized to do that, but sorry. So you have these patients that are feeling bad. What are they doing? They're popping ibuprofen. Well, guess what? That's just damaging the cheesecloth more, and then you get into this, what I call the downward spiral. The third thing is you need to replace anything that you're deficient in. If you've got a leaky gut and your villi, your roots are damaged, you end up with a whole host of nutritional and micronutrient deficiencies that need to be corrected. And then the fourth thing is you need to re-inoculate the gut with good bacteria. So at the end of the day, we fix your cheesecloth and try and establish a more normal microbiome. Did you know that if you were C-section versus vaginal delivery and you weren't breastfed, your chances of getting allergies and autoimmune disorders is much, much higher? So those of you that grew up on a farm, were vaginally delivered and breastfed. And I want to just make a point of this because this is kind of an area of interest of mine, the neuroexcitatory amino acids, which would include aspartic acid and aspartame and glutamic acid and glutamine, and MSG. So we did a study in 1996. I was interested to see if MSG was the trigger for irritable bowel syndrome. And remember what I said earlier, my interest was really in food intolerances and food sensitivities initially. So we fed a patients a meal with MSG and non-MSG to see if it would make their digestive symptoms worse, and it did. But this is one of the just simplest things that we see is the person that's chewing sugar-free gum or drinking diet soda with aspartame. It can cause a whole host of problems like migraine headaches and fatigue and brain fog. And well, I can remember when aspartame first came out, and I would drink, this is like late 80s, I would drink a Diet Pepsi every day at lunch thinking, hey, sugar-free, this is going to be great. That was around the same time as the egg white omelet and the boneless skinless chicken breast. 1980s, forget about it. But I would go back to the office and I was just, felt like I ate Thanksgiving dinner. I couldn't concentrate, I was really tired. And it turned out it was the aspartame. So that was one of the things that got me interested in this. But let's just talk about that for a minute. So glutamic acid is a neuroexcitatory amino acid, amino acids being the building blocks of proteins. Aspartic acid is one of the amino acids found in aspartame. So aspartic acid and glutamic acid both stimulate a receptor in the brain called the NMDA or the N-methyl-D-aspartate receptor. And that's what can trigger the headaches in susceptible people, and chronic overstimulation is neurodegenerative. And I can't tell you how many people I've seen that are doing diet soda, They're maybe taking a bunch of the statin medications, lowering their cholesterol too much, and they're got 1 foot in the Alzheimer's ward. Get them off the aspartame, cut back on the statin. You need cholesterol, right? I mean, this notion that take statin, the lower the cholesterol, the better. Can't get it too low. It's insane. All of our steroid hormones come from cholesterol. So if your cholesterol is too low, then you can't make cortisol, DHEA, pregnenolone, your sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So when you see the statin commercials and it'll say, you know, if you experience muscle aches or discomfort, you know, talk to your doctor. Well, if you come tell me that, I'm going to say, let's check your testosterone. If you're a guy, it was low to begin with, you went on the statin, it dropped even further, and you need testosterone for muscle health. So just don't do aspartame. That's the easy thing. You know, I got one thing out of that. I'm cutting out the diet soda. So it kind of gets into the question of what should I eat? And there's a lot of conflicting information out there. And if I was going to do a new book, a new cookbook, it would be eat nutrient-dense whole foods with a focus on vegetables, preferably organic, some fruit, again organic. You want good fats. Fat is not the enemy. You don't get fat from eating fat, you get fat from eating carbohydrates. 80% of your cholesterol comes from eating carbohydrates, not from eating fat. We've got to dismiss that whole notion. So nutrient-dense whole foods with a focus on vegetables and fruit, preferably organic. You want quality protein, and you want good fats. And the title of the book is going to be called If It Tastes Good, Spit It Out. But that's not really true. I mean, put some olive oil, lemon juice, and good sea salt in anything. I like to cook. But put some good sea salt, olive oil, lemon juice, garlic. You can make anything taste good. You know, get some grass-fed butter, put it on anything. You can make it taste good. But get away from the whole low-fat notion. And this gets to be, you'll always see these articles, supplements do nothing. And there was one on fish oil once, and it was a Greek study. I didn't know the Greeks were specialists in cardiology. But they looked at taking a fish oil supplement, and they found that it only decreased the cardiovascular risk by 9%. They said, well, that's not statistically significant. So, and that was the headline. All the cardiologists said, we're not into fish oil anymore. Well, A, what was the quality of the fish oil? B, it did decrease it by 9%. And C, the patients they selected already had established heart disease. So that would be like going to your house, and it's on fire, and you grab the garden hose, and you try and put the fire out, and the house burns down, and you conclude that water doesn't put fire out. So it's really kind of crazy. And then they were just looking at one endpoint and not looking at all the good things a good fish oil can do for your mental health and for arthritis. It's anti-inflammatory. My point in telling you that story is just be careful when you read things that suggest, well, maybe it's not good. I mean, I can tell you all the firefighters we've got on vitamin D, we recommend vitamin D for all of our patients. And I told the medical students, if you see somebody come in my office for a cold, ask them if they're on vitamin D. And 9 times out of 10, they're not. Because the patients that are on vitamin D don't get colds because it's the best way to boost your immune system and keep from getting respiratory infections. So I kind of look at supplementation, and again, I'm just trying to help you understand, because you'll go see the supplement of the day or this year. The first thing is foundationals. Think of a pyramid. So here's the pyramid. Foundational would be things that pretty much everybody should take. Like vitamin D would be top on the list if you live in Denver, not so much if you live in Florida, closer to the equator, and you get a fair amount of sun. You know, a good probiotic. But then probiotics you could get from your food by doing kombucha tea. I'm not a big yogurt fan for getting the probiotics. There's lots of fermented foods you could get. Anytime you can get something from food, I would prefer that over taking any supplement. So you could eat, you know, wild fish a couple times a week and be okay, but it needs to be wild, and you get a good fish supplement for less than what you're going to pay for a half a pound of fish at Whole Foods. And then the next would be personalization. That would be something that you would take to treat or prevent a specific problem that you have. So if you had osteoarthritis of your knees, then you might want to take a glucosamine, hyaluronic acid, MSM preparation, which would help rebuild the cartilage. And then the last thing would be optimization, and that's something that you might take for kind of anti-aging. I'm actually 85. You're in the business. But seriously, you know, that's something that would help decrease inflammation. And then it gets more and more expensive as you get higher up the pyramid. So hopefully that helps you understand there needs to be a rational basis for anything that you take, not just because you read the latest article about it. And these are some health myths that I like to talk about, like always eat breakfast and frequent small feedings. Total, how many of you heard about intermittent fasting and restricted feeding windows? That's the way we should eat. You know, we should eat between 8 and 10 hours in the day. The rest of the time, don't eat anything. Because every time you eat, you stimulate your insulin secretion. And at the end of the day, it's all about keeping those insulin levels low. How many of you have done intermittent fasting? It's really easy. Just don't eat. What am I going to prepare? Nothing. Misconception I alluded to earlier, we get fat from eating fat. We get fat from eating carbohydrates. Atkins was right. I mean, I think we refined that whole low carbohydrate notion. And fats raise our cholesterol. No, it's carbohydrates that do that. And cholesterol is public enemy number one. That's kind of hogwash. The number one thing you want to do if you want to live longer and feel better is to decrease cellular inflammation. So we all have biological clocks that are ticking. And some are ticking faster and others than maybe our cells, ticking at different levels. So the thing that determines how fast your biological clock is ticking is the amount of cellular inflammation that you have. So one of the things that we do as part of our physicals is we check the CRP, which is an inflammatory marker. And when you see it's elevated, those are the people that, you know, look not as good as they should. I want to go to a class reunion, measure everybody's CRP level, compare it to the picture in their yearbook, see how they look relative to their CRP in their pictures. So this is what we do at the care group. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we'll open it up for questions. I don't know what the time's like. I know we covered a lot of stuff. I just want to kind of get you thinking about different things. And, you know, we alluded to this. If anybody that thinks this whole gluten thing's a fad, it's crazy, because we ask all of our patients to go on gluten on a trial basis. And they generally will notice when they reintroduce it, it's not so bueno. You know, how do you get started? If you want to make any lifestyle change, it requires two things. It takes motivation. You've got to want to do it. It takes knowledge. The worst thing you can do is be motivated to lose weight and go on a, let's say, a low-fat diet. You really need to be getting rid of the toast instead of the eggs. And how should the family eat? I tell all of our patients, so if you came in as a patient and you're going, okay, I'm ready to make changes, and we have on our questionnaire, how ready are you to make these different changes? And if you're all ready to do it and you're the one that prepares the meals, we're going to tell you this is the way everybody should eat in the family. So don't be preparing something for you and some mac and cheese for the kids. You know, this is the way everybody should eat. So it becomes a generational thing. So any questions?
So when you initially would go to your office as a new patient, what is the first thing you do as a doctor? Like an annual wellness visit, I want a new doctor?
No, usually, so our patients are all screened, and we have a script from every touch point from the original call to make sure they're a fit for the practice. Because I really don't want to spend time seeing someone that found us through the Cigna directory and they live in the area and they don't have any clue what functional medicine is. So most of the patients that we see are seeking us out. So we would kind of just make sure, I want to make sure it's a fit. And then most of the patients, we would do initial consultation. So most of the patients that we see have a lot, I call them the holistic patients, because they have a whole list of problems. And, you know, your annual preventive care exam is just that. It's kind of almost more like a sports physical. So most patients, we would do a new patient consultation. Our practice is different in that we do functional and traditional medicine. Being an MD, I can write a script if you need one. A lot of the functional medicine practices are naturopaths, chiropractors, and they do great work, but they can't prescribe if you need it. The other thing is we accept most insurances. A lot of functional medicine practices are cash only. And the third thing is we can be your primary care. So I have a team of nutritionists and nurse practitioners. I like to see the new patients, try and get them on the right trajectory, and let the nurse practitioners do more of just the, you know, physicals and the mundane stuff. You had a question?
Yeah, so as far as like ketosis, you were talking about Atkins, why it seems like I've done it, a ketogenic diet, and it completely changed like everything about my body, like inflammation, enterophagitis went away, just inflammation all over went down. But why are doctors and GI docs like so against that?
So if you can eat ketogenic, man, that's the way to go, because ketones are, for those of you that don't understand the ketogenic diet, that's basically you're so low carb that your body starts burning fat as a fuel, and a byproduct of fat metabolism is ketones. So we have in our cells these little organelles called mitochondria, which are the furnaces that create energy in the form of ATP. And for most people, the mitochondria are burning glucose through the Krebs cycle, creating ATP, and that's the energy currency that gets burned when you need energy. When you go really low carb and you deplete all your glycogen or carbohydrate stores, then the mitochondria start looking for another fuel source and starts burning fat. But that takes about 2 weeks. But ketones are great brain food, great for seizures. I mean, if we could all, I wish I had the discipline to eat that way. I mean, I'm pretty paleo, but I can't say that. And I'll do it from time to time, and I'll go on an intermittent fasting binge, and then I'll go on an eating binge. It's actually, I'm kind of making a joke, but it's been shown that that sort of feast or famine is actually good for your system. It seems like it would shock it, but it's actually good to fast for about 2 or 3 days and then, pig out for a little bit. That's kind of what our ancestors did.
And does that have any effect on your liver or your?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, you've still got registered dietitians that have the pyramid with whole grains at the bottom, which that's the biggest. I had a registered dietitian. This was about 10 years ago. She was 26, just graduated from CSU, came in as a patient, and she had some digestive issues, but she also had what's called hyperkeratosis pilaris, and these are little red bumps on the back of the arm, which are real common, and that is a marker for gluten sensitivity, or maybe leaky gut. But anyway, she had that. I said, well, you need to go gluten-free. And she rolled her eyes, and I said, you think this is a fad, don't you? And she's like, this is so much of a fad. All right, you're 26, I'm 50 shot. So I said, do me a favor. I said, just do what I asked you to do and see how you feel. I mean, I probably don't need to coach you up on how to go gluten-free since you're a registered dietitian, and I know it all. So long story short, she did it. She comes back in about 4 weeks later. This is pretty much all gone. All her digestive symptoms are gone, and she lost 8 or 10 pounds. So she wasn't that heavy to begin with. She was like, real. I said, now are you bleeding? Any other questions? Some of you have to go back to work. Well, great. You've been a great audience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Too late.
Where is the care group located?
We're at 6 and 225 in Aurora.
Nice.
And if anybody wants ongoing information like this, we put out newsletters once a month. Our next one is going to be about good fat versus bad fat. So I'd be happy to take your email address if anybody's interested in learning more.